Sound preferences, input, MacBook, perfect. And input volume, let me hook you guys up so you guys can hear me better. All right, cool. Yeah, so self in Ruby and this in JavaScript, the only similarity that they have is that they might be talking about a particular object. But that's it. In the way that they're used and the way that they're implemented, they're completely different. So today we're going to talk about how they're different and how this is not always what you expect it to be. In general, if we look at the console, can anybody tell me what this is just off the bat, like on its own?
The window.
The window. Okay, so that is, this is the window when we are at what's called the global execution context. That means when nothing else is loaded into JavaScript and no other function has been called, then this will be the window. In Node, I'm not exactly sure what this is, but it's some sort of also global, global instance. As a matter of fact, if we just crank up Node real quick, so this in Node is the global object. If you guys can see here, object global, which is similar to the window in the browser. Right now, we are more concerned with JavaScript in the browser than we are with Node, so that's where we're going to keep it to. But we're going to talk about the differences between this and self. So if we look at some Ruby code that we've got right here, if we have a class of person, okay, and then we have like self.say something, this self is always going to be referring to the person class. Okay, if it was on an object, instead of on the class, then it would refer to the instance of that object. Always, no matter what. In JavaScript, it's a little different. So if I do this.name, I'm just giving this an extra attribute right now called name, and we're setting it on the window object. We're going to create a simple function call. And what is this in general? When we say this in English, what does it mean?
Referring to a thing.
Referring to a thing. Okay, like
the thing that we're working on.
The thing that we're working on or talking about. So like if I was at if I was on the ferry and I said this ride is great, what's this in this case? The ferry ride, exactly. So if I was stuck in traffic on the bus or in Port Authority and I say this place sucks, let's say I was in Port Authority, what am I talking about?
Where you are.
Where you are. So this has something to do with the context of where we use it, right? So it depends on where we are with the context that this is referring to. In JavaScript, it's kind of similar, but this will refer to the execution context of where we're calling that this from. So it's not really on the object, it's where this is being executed within like a function or within an object. So we're going to start real simple, and we're going to just create the function, the ferry. So we're going to create a function called the ferry, and I'm just going to console log this by itself, right? So if we come back over here, and we open this guy up, am I not in the, oh, I never called it. So, what did I call it here? If I just call the ferry, okay, this in there is the window object, right? Simple enough. Okay, so when we call a function, a function with this inside of it and there's no reference to anything else, it's always going to be the global object when we are executing from like within the global area. Once we get into different objects and methods, we're going to see that it gets a little more convoluted and a little more difficult to kind of understand what's happening, but not so difficult that you guys can't get it. We're going to talk about functions called on an object. Now, all of this that I'm saying today has to do with using the function keyword. We're going to get into arrow functions a little later, and they treat this a little differently. but we're going to talk about just regular function like this, how we're used to treating functions. Okay? So now let's say I create a object. What does somebody want to create an object about? Give me a thing, a place, whatever. A noun, a mammal.
Full name. I have first name and last name.
So like a person, right?
Yeah.
Function, no, not function. So we're going to do person equals, okay, and then a person has a name. And this person today, because he volunteered, is Sufyan. All right. And he's got a favorite what?
Favorite sport.
Favorite sport. And what's that?
Soccer.
Soccer. Okay.
Declare the person.
Huh?
You never declare the person. Like left or constant.
Sure. So, and Sufyan greets, let's say. And we've all seen this before already, right? Where we can create a function as a key to a object, right? Because functions are first-class citizens in JavaScript, right? So we've seen this before. Is this new to anybody? Okay, cool. So over here, we're just using the function keyword again. We're creating a function called greet, and now we're going to say console log this.name. Okay, and I'm going to put this as this.name too for the fairy. Okay, so now what's going to happen when I run? You guys want me to make this dark again, or is this too bright, like the switching back and forth? A little bit. Sorry. That's as good as it's gonna get. Oh, that's great.
That's fun.
I mean, I can change the styling, but that's gonna take away from some of the lecture time. So no, we're good. All right. So if I call the fairy now, and I'm calling this.name. See that I set a this.name to the window object. I just added an extra property. Oh, thanks. Cool. Did I save? So now if I call the fairy, we're gonna get. Hold on, did I not save it? Console log this.name.
You have to refresh the page?
Yes. So if I call the fairy, we're getting window object, right? But now if I call person dot greet, what do we think this dot name is going to be? You guys are so smart. All right. So why does that happen? That happens. Go ahead.
This changed. Like you're referring to it in the object.
I'm referring to it from within an object. Correct. So we are inside of an object when we are calling this. Now, here's a funny thing. In JavaScript, functions like arrays and like objects are passed by reference. Do you guys remember what passed by reference is? What's passed by reference?
You pass not like the value itself, but rather like the address at which like whatever the thing you're calling is at, so you're able to basically whatever scope it is, you're still referencing the same area of memory.
Cool, yeah. So I could create like two arrays, right? Like A equals 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, and then I could say B equals A, right? And then if we try to see if B strictly equals A, meaning that they're the same memory address, it's true. So whatever I do to B now, it's also going to happen to A. So if I do B.pop, now if I check the value of B, we see that the 4 is missing. But if I check the value of A, we see that the 4 is also missing. So they are equivalent, all right? Unlike a string that's passed by value where they're not equivalent. A string or an integer or a float, if I set one equal to one variable and another one equal to another variable and I change their values, then the values are going to be different and they're no longer going to equal each other. Okay, does that make sense? Cool. So functions are first-class objects, and functions are passed by reference. So if I do, what did I call it? Greet. Will these two be strictly equal?
Yeah.
Let's find out. They are, right? So that means I can call greet like this, or I can call person.greet, right? So what's going to be the value if I do greet like this? Sufyan? Oh, my heart hurts. Window object. What the heck? Why?
I think because you reference to the function, not to the result of the function.
But the functions are the same. It's the same exact function. See that? They are identical. They're the same location of memory.
But if you did a great equal person great and called great again, it's not going to be equal, right?
What do you mean?
If you give parentheses in the end of person dot great.
If I do greet
Equal person.
and then do this,
Yeah.
well, one fires off the function. This is actually going to run it, so it's not going to be equal. And this will run the function too. So I'm not even sure if that's allowed. Let's see. Yeah, so it is allowed, and it's still saying that it's true.
Sure.
So even though they give us two different values, okay? So I'm going to show you guys.
Well, is it just because when you call a function with person, you're calling it within that like execution context, whereas when you just call greet, you're calling it within the execution context of like the window?
That's exactly correct. So the way that execution context gets passed down, it's a little tricky. I want to refer you guys to a tweet by Dan Abramoff, object.method tweet. Let's see. These two snippets are different. Okay? Learn why, and you will understand JavaScript. Now we've seen what we just did a minute ago. I called object.method. Okay, in our case, object was person, method was greet. Okay? And this is what I did. I did greet equals this guy, and then I called method. And it's different. It says learn why and you'll understand JavaScript. So we're seeing that these two give us different values. One gives us Sufyan, the other one gives us the window object. And then what Jack said is that we have different execution contexts that, and it depends on where we are calling these methods. So when you are calling a method that is not attached to an object, okay, you're going to be at the execution context that is above that, that scope for the execution. So if we're just calling a method outside by itself on the global area of our, like right here, all right, and not inside of not as a method from within a object, then we're going to be in the global execution context. Once we are inside of a method, of a object, and we're calling the method from within it, then the execution context is going to come from this person object that's here. Another quick example so you guys can see the difference between these guys. I'm going to create a new person. Person2 equals, I think this one's going to be Jimmy. Name Jimmy. Jimmy, you got a little case, J. All right. So the same way that we assigned methods to their own variable, like I did here, greet equals person.greet, I could do person2 dot greet equals this same greet function that I did earlier, or this one would be equivalent. So I'm just going to do greet. Greet and person.greet, remember, are the same function. It doesn't matter. They are identical functions. So I'm going to put person2.greet here is equal to greet now. So what would happen if I call person2.greet in this case now? Jimmy. Exactly. Cool. Nothing groundbreaking there. We just gave that same function. Again, now if I do person2.greet person1.greet.
Just person.
Ah, yeah, sorry. Okay, which is the same thing as, okay, that function has not changed. Only one function exists, okay, and it exists on the person1 object right now, okay? The only thing that we're changing is the execution context of where that function is being called. In one place, we're calling it from the global, from the window object, when we just call greet on itself. In the other case, we're calling it on person by itself, when we call person.greet. And in another case, that same function that's inside person1, we're calling from within person2 by assigning it to person2. Okay, and again, it's the same function that's in person1, but it's giving us completely different output. It's using the this as the object of person2. Okay, that's the biggest thing of this in JavaScript. How do we feel about that? Does anyone need any clarification on that?
Yeah, it's just about this out of scope, like in the global. It just like, can you explain more a little bit, please?
The
Like,
this out in the
so
global
they have
scope.
the same function, but when you call both of them, they give you like a different output.
Yeah, so it's the same function. Again, it depends on what it's being called on, who the receiver is of that function. So in this case, person2 is the receiver of greet, right? So then person2, greet will refer to this, and greet will refer to person2. We'll refer to the function from within it got called, from within which it got called. Okay? We're gonna get a little deeper, and it's gonna get a little more confusing when we see it again. But I just want you guys to see that right now, like for this level that we're at, we are when we call it on an object, it's this is gonna refer to that object. Okay? Because we're in the execution context of that object itself. Okay? So, any other questions?
Yes. Now that we have like the same function saved in different places, the definition, can we change the definition of the function, right?
Can we change the definition of the function? We should be able to. So you're saying like do person.greet equals function and change it here to something else to why you change me. I've never tried this. Let's find out. So person2.greet, it's still giving us Jimmy, yeah. So let's see what happens with person. Oh shoot, yeah, I keep making that mistake. Why you changed me, Sufyan. Okay, so it looks like once it was assigned, that's probably got something to do with closures. I don't really know the best answer for that, but I will research it for you to see why that happens. It should be the same function, but I think because of something called closures, it remembered its old value. So that's why we could still use this person2.greet, and it's still going to be the old value. Or we're going to do greet equals, I'm sorry, or just greet. We're still going to get the window object until we reassign person2.greet to, and hold on, also, which is going to make it more confusing.
Thank you.
Okay, until we reassign it to, I'm sorry, person. Okay. So yeah, these are false, but until we now reassign this to this guy, we're not going to have that same equivalency anymore. Okay? So again, that's got something to do with closures. That's not something that we're talking about today, but it remembers the last execution context that it was assigned through, and that's the reason why we can change that, but not changed for everything else where it was previously assigned. So that's kind of like a fail-safe too, in case you change something that something else is relying on until you rechange it again.
Just one more thing. Can you reassign, like, in this case we have that grade, that is a function, can we assign it to like a primitive data type?
Yeah, unless we make it like a const. Blah. So who do you want to reassign it on? Person, person2, or just greet itself?
Just go with person2.
All right, and now if we try to do this, we're going to get an error, not a function. Okay? Cool. So we see how this works when we assign the same function across different methods. We see how this works when the function is standalone or by itself, that's not within an object. Okay? What happens when I need a collection of something for Sufyan? Sufi, what do you like collecting? What are your favorite foods?
Mexican.
I need more than one.
Tacos.
Mexican, tacos.
Japanese.
All right, so tacos
And sushi.
and sushi. That's a weird combo, but okay.
Yeah, I'm weird too.
Anything else? Anything else you want to throw in there?
Couscous.
Couscous. Is this
Moroccan food.
couscous like that?
Yeah.
OUS.
OUS. Couscous. Is it spaced out like this?
Nah, it's fine.
One? Great. Couscous.
You want
Awesome.
more?
Sure, you want to give me another one? No problem.
Ajit.
Tajin?
Yeah.
Ooh, we have one of those pots at home. That's a ceramic pot with the hole at the top,
Yeah,
right?
at
It
the
looks like a
top,
little
yeah.
pyramid.
Like a
Yeah,
pyramid.
good stuff in there.
Good stuff there, bro.
All right, so we're gonna create another function called getFoods. All right, and there's gonna be another function.
I think you have to get chroma in the line 21.
Yeah, thank you. Let me see here. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to do this dot favor foods dot for each. You know what? Let's just do that right in the greet function. This dot favorite foods dot for each, and then what does this take? A callback, right?
Yeah,
Function. And it's going to be the food. Okay. And I'm going to do console.log in the context of person for each, and then we want to print out this is our favorite foods. Okay, now we want to print out this. No, I'm sorry. We want to print out food, right? So it's gonna should say taco, sushi, couscous, tagine. All right, so let's see what happens when we do this now. All right, so we had person dot greet. Any wild guess to what's gonna happen?
You're gonna get over the array and gonna find the message.
All right, so we've got tacos, sushi, couscous, and tagine. And hold on, I gotta do this dot name here for you. Because this dot name is Sufyan, right? So we gotta do this guy. What did I miss? Oh shoot, thank you. All right, so let's do that again. And no, I'm sorry. Person. So what do we think this dot name is going to be here? The window? Sufyan?
Because this name represents this that being called on person. No? Oh, that's it.
Can you go through that? Like how that happens?
Okay, so again, we're talking about execution context, and whenever we create a new function where it's called, that new function now is going to forget that we were in the object, okay, and this for each, this takes a callback function, okay, so this function is going to go back to the global execution context, okay? So now the for each, the this inside of the for each is not going to be referring to the object anymore. It's going to be referring to the global execution context. So we've left the execution context from within this function because we created a new function in here. Okay, and then that's why this dot name is no longer Sufyan, but it's window object that we defined way up here.
So basically, when we made a function there, basically we're telling the this that we are out of scope, so we're calling this from the global scope.
I wouldn't put it in those terms. I mean, if that's the way it helps you think about it,
yeah,
sure. But it's not really the scope, it's where things are called. I guess like a scoped call, you could call it, if you want to like create a new term for it. Like a scoped function call, like we're calling this function, and it's going to have like its own scope that's no longer from the function above that that inherited its execution context from the object that it was assigned to.
But it's going to give us the same result if we come to the line 26 and we made like a callback function, and instead of for each function food, we just give a name of the function, and then it's going to give us this name is window object, right?
So you're saying that if we created a new object here or a new function,
Function, yeah. This is gonna loop through the array and give us the same thing.
Yeah, so you're saying if we had a function that calls this person?
Yeah, if we did like function and we just do like, so yeah, so let's this and we loop it through array, which is gonna be this food, I guess.
Okay, so this is it's gonna take an object, you're saying?
Array,
It's gonna take an array.
which is like the favorite food.
Mm-hmm.
And we just did console log. And we pass the same thing that we have in 22, in the line 22.
Mm-hmm. So you're saying if I were to rewrite this and then use this
And
function?
yeah, inside there.
Yeah, correct.
It's gonna
So
give us the same as Windows object.
it's gonna give us the same window object. So let's call this, instead of function food, we're gonna call this get foods, right? And then we got rid of this. Actually, we're gonna need this right here, and we toss that in here. We should have food is not defined. Array. Yeah. So we have the same deal. It's just we wrote our callback outside instead of writing it on the spot right here. Okay. So.
And just to clarify this, we're actually not passing the array, we're just passing each element of the array, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yep. So this is just like declaring the function right where it was a minute ago. So bind, call, apply. How do we feel about this so far? Does anybody have any questions? Is this any kind of weird, confusing that I might be able to clear up for anybody? Fist to 5. How's everyone feeling? 5, 3, 3, 5, 4, 4, 5. Okay, cool. All right, so everyone feels pretty good. This is really pretty important. We got to try to keep in mind that whenever we create a new function, the execution context switches again for every new function. Arrow functions behave a little differently. So right now I'm only speaking about when we use the function keyword to declare functions. So just keep that in mind. And then the big stink is the function is the same function when we assign it in different places because it's passed by reference. So they're all going to be the same function. It's just where and how you call it. Wherever you're sending that function to is going to give us a different value for this. That's the biggest trip up for this in JavaScript. This is tricky. Okay? But that's as tricky as it gets. The rest from now on, I'm going to show you guys how to make sure that we can keep the execution context from this guy over here, from this person object, from the object that's above it. All right? And the way that we do that is we bind whatever we want to make this for that function moving forward. Okay? So for instance, we've got this person object here, right? If we come back over here and we do, let's refresh everything. And before we did greet equals person dot greet, right? And we knew that the functions was the same, but this keyword wasn't the same anymore. If we want to save that this keyword from the object that it was on to this new function that we're assigning it to, okay, then all we have to do is call .bind and then pass in the thing that we want to bind, so whatever the this is going to be. So in our case, we want it to be person, right? So now, greet, when I call it, what's going to happen? Yep. So it's gonna give us Sufyan. So we're still, for this guy, because we haven't bound this to it, it's still the window object. But now we were able to call greet without it being person.greet. We just called greet on its own, and we were able to get Sufyan instead of the window object. All right, so that's pretty cool, right? We're binding this to whatever. Now the thing is, for person 2,
can we just sign it to greet because it has, or no? Instead of person?
yeah, we can. So person.greet.bind person. Yeah. Person.to.greet. Thank you.
You did make me in.
Oh, that's right. So let's make it here so that we have access to Jimmy for the rest of our days. Jimmy, for that today, you get a capital J. You've been leveled up. So we're gonna do person.to, person.greet, and then we're gonna bind person. But now, person.to.greet is gonna be still Sufyan. All right, so just keep that in mind. If we're gonna reassign it, once it's been bound, it's stuck, bound to whatever we bound that to. All right. Cool. So that's how we keep that bind across the execution context that we're firing our functions on. So this bind and apply, that came out for es5. That was one of the ways that we were able to keep a reference to whatever it is that we were talking about. Back in the day, people used to do something like let that equal this, or var. I've got a comma there.
At the end of this. Not sure about that.
Oh, I'm sorry. This is an object.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so we would do something like that equals this. Okay, don't do this. This is like old school. If you see it, shame on whoever wrote it. And then they would use, instead of this, they would use that here. And that was just a hacky way of like getting around that issue that we had. Now, from ES5, we have this bind, call, and apply, which are new methods that they gave us for dealing with this problem in JavaScript. And let's see, what else? So finally, in a situation like this that we have right here, okay, that we want to pass that value of this to another execution context, which would be the callback here, get foods, okay? We could do either bind person, which isn't super flexible, because if I were to call this later on person 2, we're going to have the issue where the name is still going to be Sufyan. So what else might I be able to bind here instead of person?
This.
Yes. Perfect. You guys are so smart, all of you. So happy.
Hey, real quick.
Yeah.
Favorite foods. When we were running it before, do we define that outside of this, outside of the person context?
Favorite foods.
Because inside greet, it's like this stuff, favorite foods, right? So when we were outside in the global context, what was favorite foods? Because did the global context have like a?
You mean like out here?
Yeah.
No, there would be no favorite foods. There is a this.name because I just defined that on the big object, but there is no this dot.
So why didn't we get an error when we tried to? Oh, it's
On error where?
like when we were calling greet in the global context, did we not get an error when we tried to call for each on undefined?
That's a good question. So let's see. Oh, let's not bind anymore. Well, no. So this that favorite foods. I see what you're saying. That is a little confusing. But we're still. Let's see. How do I explain
Does it
that?
still like refer to that area of favorite foods inside person?
Let's find out. This that favorite foods. I don't know, to be honest. You guys see what he's asking?
Yeah.
So if we do greet equals person dot greet, and then we call greet, we want to know what the value of this dot favorite foods is
Yeah.
for each of undefined.
How come we didn't? I feel like maybe we didn't do greet.
Yeah, I don't think we did greet on its own. Yeah.
Okay. We did it from person to.
Yeah. All right. Cool.
Wouldn't it be the same problem with person 2? Because person 2 just has name. I'm going to just give it the greet function.
That's a good question. And let's go back over here and put person 2 dot greet, person dot greet. Same deal. Cannot read property for each of undefined. So yeah, we would need to have his favorite foods here too for this to not break. All right, cool. Thank God that worked that way because I wouldn't know how to explain it if it was working the other way. So, woo! I really had no idea if it was the other way. I'm like, well, JavaScript's crazy, man. Oh man. All right, cool. So. Yeah, so now let's also give Jimmy some favorite foods. Jimmy, talk to me. Ramen. Fried rice. That's it? Those are the highlights? No tacos for you, man? Everyone loves tacos. Burritos. Is that how you spell burritos? Is it 2 T's and 1 R? No, that doesn't look right. I think this is right. Yeah. Sorry, I can't spell. All right, cool. So, dope. What are we doing? Oh, so we're binding. We're gonna bind now instead of, like I said, instead of binding person, which would also bind their name or just this guy, whatever this is in here, we're going to bind just the keyword this. Where are we? We're going to bind this, all right? And then that way, whatever this is going to be passed along. So if we come back over here and we refresh, and we do person2.greet equals person.greet. Cannot read property bind of on. Oh, I'm sorry. Command X. We got to throw that into this guy, right? Because that's we got to bind it to this function here. And I was binding it to the for each. Okay. So Now we've got Jimmy, and the for each is in the context of Jimmy, Jimmy, Jimmy. Okay? How do we feel about that? Does that make sense?
I think like for the for each, you can just give it a second argument of like this code that you made instead of binding it. So that works too.
For the for each, I give it a second argument of the scope that I need.
Yes.
So I could do this.
Yep. I think that works.
Let's find out. I've never tried it. Cool. So for each, you can give it a second argument. I did not know this. So awesome job, Danny.
I think there's like that works for like most of enumerables.
Uh-huh.
Like so like a filter.
Cool.
And reduce maybe.
Nice.
This arg or something. You do the document definition usually.
What's that?
It's called this arg.
This arg?
Yeah.
This arg. Okay, cool. So yeah, look at that. I learned something new too. So yeah, as a second argument, you don't have to hit bind. You can just pass this to the enumerables like Danny said. Awesome. Love learning new things. So, cool. So we bound this. We also learned that we could send this as a second argument to enumerables. But if we have other functions that aren't enumerables that don't take this arg as a second argument, then we're going to have to use the bind call like this. Okay. So bind just attaches something to a execution context and then fires it off, or wait before it gets called to get fired off. Now we have two other methods that again were introduced in ES 2015 called call and apply. Okay. Now these two methods do the same thing, except the difference is they fire the function off immediately. It doesn't wait for the function to get fired like bind does, or it's waiting for you to call it at a later point. Okay? So in our case here, like if we had person 2, right? And let's get rid of this for each here for a minute. And we're going to refresh the page. I remember we just did this a minute ago where we said person 2.greet equals person.greet, and then we bound, person, right? And now if we call person2.greet, it's still going to be Sufyan stuff. All right, but what if we just wanted to do that right off the bat? Let's refresh. Now I've got person2.greet, doesn't exist. All right. Another thing we could do is we could do person2.greet, and then we can call. Okay, and then call is actually going to execute the function for us. We can call person, okay, and then it takes whatever arguments we want to pass to that thing, but right now there is no person2.greet.call. person2.call person.greet. I forgot how to use .call, man. Sorry, guys. Full name, person.fullname.call. Yeah, so I feel like this was person dot greet, I'm sorry, person2 dot greet dot call cannot read property call of undefined.
Because person2 greet is not exist yet.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah. I'm doing it backwards. You're right. I got it backwards. So it's person dot greet dot call person2. So now we're sending person2 as the this to the person object's greet function. So now, even though we're calling person and we're calling the greet function on it, and now we're passing in person2, so we're going to get the execution context from person2. Okay, sorry about that, guys. I got a little tripped up there. So as you can see, this stuff's pretty confusing. I get confused myself. I forget things. We could also do, instead of call, we can do apply person2. They work in exactly the same way. Okay, the big difference is call. If the function that you're calling is going to take multiple arguments, okay, with call you would just pass in a bunch of comma separated arguments. Or whatever the arguments are. If it's an array, then it'll be separated by, so like let's say the third argument was an array, then you would have whatever you have going on here. Okay? So with call, you're going to have commas, and then with apply, the arguments are going to be passed in as an array. Okay? That's the big difference between call and apply. It really isn't that confusing. The only thing is remembering which is which. Just remember call, C, is separated by commas. Apply, array, separated by an array. Cool?
Question. You said that, so for call and apply, they just run directly as you just define them? So it wouldn't like, the object wouldn't be bind into it, right? So now if you do person.greet, it'll go back to the previous, this context.
Let's find out. Yep. All right, so it doesn't save the execution, it doesn't change the execution context of the original object. It just creates a new call, and it just changed the execution context at one singular time. What's up?
Does it create like a function greet inside person2, or is it only just when we we won't be able to say person2.greet after doing this, right? Like person2.
Oh, I don't know. Let's find out. Person2.greet. Nope.
Okay.
Yeah, so you have to,
It just calls it like once and give it the property.
Yeah. Or maybe you could do, well, it's going to call it. So if I do person2 equals this, it's just going to give me the return value of whatever this was. So I can't do that either. So person2.greet. Yeah, so if I did this, it's not really a function that I'm calling anymore. I'm just setting a new return value. Right, so if I were to do this, greet is not a function. Right, so person2.greet, that should have given me this. Anyway, I don't want to go down another rabbit hole. So that is call and apply. That's when we add them to change the execution context of other methods that we want to call and invoke immediately. Bind is how we make sure that the this refers to the this that we expect it to refer to. Let's see, what else? Okay, so that's it. Before we get into arrow functions, how do we feel about bind, call, and apply with this? Any questions? Anything else that I might be able to clear up? Cool. All right. So now for es6, after this bind, call, and apply, well, bind, call, and apply were introduced in es5, then es6 came along, and we said, you know what? This bind, call, and apply business, it's a little wordy. There's a lot of situations where we're going to want the value of this from the previous execution context. So then arrow functions were created. And arrow functions absorb the previous execution context. All right? So this is using the function keyword. Okay? And do we know how to create an arrow function? Right? So what do we think is going to happen here? It's going to be Sufyan in person. Anybody else? Jimmy, like always, you are wrong. It's the window object. Just kidding, you're right pretty often. Well, more often than not. But that's a tricky one. That it absorbs the execution context. Remember, so the execution context here was the window object. The function is what binds the execution context to this guy here. So the arrow function will work as expected in the for each because it'll absorb the execution context that was above it. The execution context that was above this guy was the window, the global execution context. So that's the reason why we got window object and then we got window, because this is the window and this is the window object. So we have to keep the function keyword here, okay? But if we were going to do the for each business down here again, this dot favorite foods dot for each. As a matter of fact, let me just recopy this down at the bottom with something else, so you guys have this code when I post it up later. So instead of person, let's create like a cat. Amigo, that's my cat. He doesn't have a favorite sport. He has a favorite activity. Nah, he likes napping. And funny enough, these are exactly his favorite foods. So this dot favorite foods dot for each. Okay, now we can do an arrow function, and this would be food. And if we were to grab Jack, this guy, where to go? This in the context of for each. This dot name, and we're going to put the food here also. So, oh, FOD, food. All right, so now, because we use an arrow function, it absorbed the previous execution context. It automatically gets bound, all right? And this dot name should be Amigo, if all goes according to plan. I hope all goes according to plan. All right, so now we're in the context of for each, and this dot name is Amigo, and there are his favorite foods. All right, so all that the arrow function does is it takes away the necessity for us to use the bind keyword to bind this to whatever we're using. Again, for the for each, as we just found out from Danny, it's not as important because you can just pass in that this argument is the second argument. But for other functions that you might define yourself, and you're trying to keep this or a reference of this, then you can just use a arrow function. And we're going to be using that a lot more in React when we're going to need to keep the value of this across an entire class.
Question. Like for line 48 that we define a function, could we do it like with the arrow function and just bind this?
No. Bind does not work with arrow functions at all. So you can't do that. We could try, but it should give us an error. And this guy ends here.
Would it be on the purple one? You bind the grid with like the entire function with this.
What, like here?
Like at the end of all the function.
At the end of the other function?
Yes, on line 54.
Ah, that's where it is. I'm sorry. Yeah, I tried putting it in here, and I thought that was the end of it. Find this. Yeah, so it doesn't even like it. Yep. Is this? Yeah, that's where it closes. Yeah, so you can't. You can only use bind on the regular function keyword. So, let's see. You guys saw that I had a button here, right? Just click me. So the mind is blown right there. All right, so what did I call that guy? Ooh, ID of button. Great. So we're gonna do button dot, I'm sorry, let button equals button, I'm sorry, document dot get element by ID button.
Is that the ID?
Yeah. Button dot add event listener. Jesus. Click. Oh my God. So
Really? Get rid of that. That happens too much.
function event. I'm just gonna console log dot this. Are you guys ready for this? What's this gonna be? The window again? The event?
No.
It's the button. Holy crap. We got the button. All right, cool. So it's not the target. It does get whatever the thing was that we created a event listener to. Even though these are the same thing, console.log e.target. Yeah, this is going to say button twice, but this really isn't the same thing. This is only referring to whatever we attach the event listener to. So let's say I attached an event listener to the body instead of the button. I'm sorry. So I attached an event listener to the entire body instead of the button. What's going to happen here is the target is still going to be the button when I click on it, but this is going to be the document. Cool? So if I click here, now document, but then the target is this. So this will always be whatever we attach that event listener to. So that's just a little gotcha. That's something that Again, it kind of changes the execution context. It binds it to that whenever we add an event listener, which I think this is pretty useful. But I just want to show you guys that before we moved on. So we did arrow functions, and then functions being called with the new keyword. All right, so finally calling functions with the new keyword. The new keyword is to create like a constructor, kind of like how we had with Ruby. So we could do like function, I don't know, boat. What do you guys want to create? Boat, sure. And a boat has like a size and speed, right? So we could say this dot speed equals speed, and this dot size equals size. And then we're gonna return this. Okay, so now I can do something like boat1 equal, I'm sorry, boat1, or let, I don't want Jimmy yelling at me. Let boat1 equal new. And usually when we do these type of constructors, we make this capitalized. That's just convention. One of the few conventions that JavaScript has. New boat, and then we would pass in whatever, 10 and 100. All right, and then this would actually return to us a brand new boat object. All right, so the execution context of this guy is going to be just the actual object itself that we just created. So we're actually invoking the function boat, right? But in this case, this is this particular object that we created here. And we'll learn a little more about that a little further down the line. But that's pretty much it. And just to show you what we did there with the boat, boat1, see, it just created a boat object for us with a speed and a size. So boat.
Basically, we don't have to have the constructor, right? To call class and to give constructor for that argument.
Yeah, so there are classes in JavaScript that were introduced recently in es6. Yeah, you don't have to call class. You could actually just build something like this. And then what classes does is essentially creates syntactic sugar for us to create objects like so. Without doing like boat, you would just do constructor on that class. And then you don't have to return this, it just knows to do it. So that's all that classes do in JavaScript. Any questions? That's pretty much it. Any?
It's just like with the construction function that we have, apparently there's like a function that you just type, like instead of typing this, that speed equals speed, you can do directly just speed, comma, next line, and size, comma.
You're talking about like.
Yeah.
I think so.
Something like this.
Yes. And apparently, I don't think you need like the braces.
Yeah, I don't think in this case it'll work because we do need this. Now, if we had something with just, if we had something that had a an attribute of speed and an attribute of size, and it was the same, like you could create objects that if the key is equal to the value, if they're the same, then you could just write it shorthand like this instead of doing speed, I'm sorry, speed, speed, and size, size. Something like this. It doesn't like this. It does like this though. Oh. So you have something like this. You could make it shorthand and just do speed and size without setting it equal to itself in here. Does that make sense? So, but this constructor is just this dot size equals size, this dot speed equals speed, and return this. Cool. That's it. Any other questions, guys? So what did we learn today, Jack?
Today we learned about execution contexts.
Mm-hmm.
And what else can I say in regards to that? And the keyword this.
Okay. Everyone's gonna give me one thing to learn today. Brad, you're next.
Bind.
Bind. Okay. And bind, what does it do?
Puts those things together.
Attaches to this keyword
Right.
to whatever execution context you want. Gene, one thing today learned.
Call and apply.
Call and apply. What's the difference between call and apply?
When you use call, you just put in all the arguments as like separate commas
Mhm.
separated. With apply, the second argument is just an array of all the arguments.
Perfect. Babs, look at the notes.
Call and apply is different from bind because it keeps the execution context of the previous one. Or execution, yeah, so it says as the previous execution.
Yeah, so call and apply, fire off the function immediately, or bind waits till.
Oh, right, sorry, I was thinking about error functions.
You're good. Tiana.
es6 introduced arrow functions and they automatically absorb the reduced execution context.
Beautiful. Ryan.
I was going to say arrow function until she said it, so now I'm going to say constructors.
Constructors, all right. Sufyan.
This keyword, which is like very confusing,
Mhm.
but with bind, it makes it more a little bit easier to understand. It's always attached to that object if you call inside the scope, but you always should be careful because if you are not really understanding what you call this, it can lead you to the window.
Exactly. Danny.
You cannot use bind with arrow functions.
You can't use bind with arrow functions. It's a big no-no. All right, awesome. Great job, guys. Thank you very much. That was for Tiana.